You better not be jinxing me, Brian, because mine's today. Dang it, dang it.
Hey, Brian, mine was sore the first day, so this is Sal. Thanks.
Was it?
Yeah, well, yeah, they were saying that either you know, depending if you had COVID before, you may feel sore the first day or not. So,
Yeah, that's not too bad though.
yeah, that wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
Okay, I think, well, we've got 19 of us on, so it's a good group.
Yeah. And I know there's some folks who have to leave a little early. So I think we'll go ahead and get started.
Okay.
And if you want to pull the agenda up for us, Carol, thank you.
Yes.
So we made a couple of last minute revisions to the agenda just to fit some of the schedules in. We need to move some people up on the agenda, so we made some changes. And since there's so many people, I don't think we'll go around just in interest of time and do a full introduction of everybody. I think most of you probably know me. I'm Brian Dunn. I chair the Organ Modeling Steering Committee. So as people if you're making a presentation, go ahead and just introduce yourself. Maybe that would be helpful. And do we want to just go through the note approval next? I think so. Our last meeting, I think it was back in October of last year, and I believe, Carol, you already sent those notes out shortly after that meeting and got any input.
We did. Yep. The final version is posted, and hopefully everyone has looked at it. There's a link in the agenda.
Right. Yeah. So we'll go ahead and for those of you who are committee members, we'll go ahead and how do you want to do that? Do you want people to raise their hand or just
yeah,
Carol?
how about any changes noted, just speak up?
Yes.
We usually don't have any, but just in case.
Right.
And then hearing none, we will assume approval.
Approval. Yep. Okay, and just logistically, our next meeting you see Carol had there is in October. So mark your calendars for that. It'll be at the same time, the afternoon of the 20th. So thank you, Carol.
Okay.
And then the next item this is one of them that would have moved up from where we had the previous agenda, is looking at a name change. So Becky, I think you're going to lead that, and Carol, going through what that is and the why we're doing that.
Yeah. So we've been spending some time researching whether the OMSC is a public body by definition under statute, where we must follow kind of public meeting rules and processes. And we spent quite a bit of time just on this concept, and no, we do not meet the criteria to be classified as a public body where we have to do this extra documentation and a public input process. It would take more resources and time. We are just an internal collaborative technical group that shares ideas. We don't exchange money. We just try to do stuff together to save time and money and take advantage of everybody's different skill set. So with that said, we need to do some work related to communicating who we are, what we're doing. And part of that is a more clear name that describes who we are and what we do. So we've been using the OMSC acronym since this started in the mid-90s, and very conveniently, we can continue to use this same acronym just by using a new name called the Organ Modeling Statewide Collaborative. So this is an opportunity for you to kind of think about that possible name change. Does it sound good? Does it sound weird? Do you have any question as to why we need to make this change? Do you anticipate any problems or issues? So it's an open table discussion. If anybody has any thoughts or ideas related to this, please share now.
This is Cody from
Cody?
the LCD.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a
Hi,
little
Cody.
redundant with the, I don't know that you really need to keep the acronym. I feel like we just Oregon Modeling Collaborative would kind of encapsulate it and it's close enough, but just Oregon and statewide seems a little redundant to me. It looks like you're trying to, the focus is on keeping the acronym, which I don't know that that should be the goal.
Well, we do want to make it clear that it's agencies across the state. It's not just an ODOT thing. It covers the entire state. So the statewide is an important aspect of the description. And I think given the history behind the OMSC and it being around since 1995, we have done a lot of discussion with outside parties and they do recognize the name. So maintaining the acronym was an important component of this, but if others don't think it's that big of a deal, do you think maybe we don't have as much recognition and association with the acronym as I was presuming?
Yeah, this is Chris Johnson, excuse me. I get what Cody's saying. And, even if we were to choose to say, drop the statewide and be OMC, I would be willing to bet that people would still call it OMSC just out of habit anyway. We've had, just speaking internally at Metro, we've tried to rebrand some of our departments and divisions, and we've had a devil of a time trying to get folks not to revert back to sort of the way the old acronyms. And so that's just my 2 cents, I guess. And so
Okay, thanks, Chris. Ali, I see you have your hand.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm traditionalist, so I think that staying with the brand that has been in place for a while, it's important. I think OMSC, it resonates with folks if we can, and statewide does have a meaning here. It's not just a shoehorn something to catch the S, but I think it does has a connotation for what it is that we do, which is reach out beyond the agency. It's not, we have locals that are part of this and cities, and so it is beyond the your typical just Oregon state agencies. It is a statewide effort, and we want to reach out to everybody. So I think it does add something. I get it. I think I can be convinced that it can be redundant, but to maintain the old acronym, I think it does add value.
Any other thoughts or input on that from anyone?
So do we need to have the acronym mean anything? So, I mean, if we're rebranding, you're known, this is the OMSC. We don't have to have it mean anything. We are just, this group of modelers statewide, and we like the word OMSC for traditional meanings or, reasons. That's thought.
We are working on the communications side of this program. And so I think we wanted the title to actually have a better meaning. I mean, the steering committee was a little bit misleading because, what are we steering? And then steering implies budgetary authority. And this naming, it talks about collaborative. So it's kind of like voluntarily working together. And then the statewide infers multiple agencies.
When you talk to anybody, do you say OMSC or do you say the Oregon Modeling Steering Committee?
Well, if they know who we are already, we just use the acronym. When we're introducing ourselves, we go to the work plan, we go to the website, and the name is there.
Speaking for myself,
My motion then,
yeah.
you know,
I don't think if I'm not writing it, I don't say Oregon Model Steering Committee. I say OMSC, right? So
Yeah. Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I think this is just a public transparency issue more than anything.
Yeah.
Somebody might ask, what does OMSC stand for? And I'm forever looking for what does something stand for when people just change their names to the alphabet. So
Yeah.
Yes, right. I agree. Yeah, and I think the collaborative, really explains what we do. If you go way back into the 90s, I think it was more of a steering committee around the beginning of the statewide modeling program. But as that matured, and it certainly is much more of a collaborative at this point. So I think the name change for me, that going from committee to collaborative, really it clarifies what we do. So I think that makes a lot of sense for me.
And then taking this topic and using it kind of as a segue to our idea about improving communication with external groups and leadership and the legislature and management within our jurisdictional agencies. We are also going to be making major changes to our web presence. So that's what Carol's going to take us through next. But we want to start with this clarified name, and then we'll document why we're not this public we're not subject to public meeting rules, and just do a better job of really explaining who we are, what we do, and why. So I think, and then the idea of a communication plan was very briefly introduced at the MPC meeting earlier today. We kind of ran out of time, but the purpose of that plan, the MPC will provide a draft to the larger committee here. And it's focused at how we message our work to these external people, and really, really focus on our presence in that public sector, because we've been pretty invisible. So we know we need to make improvements in this area. So with that, Carol, I think, why don't you jump into your website that you've developed?
okay, so we already have an OregonModels.org domain. We have a site set up under that domain for the OMA group, the modeling users group. So the concept here is to kind of put everything under one umbrella and have both OMSC and OMUG information on the same site. It seemed to me that it would be a little cleaner that way. Also, since we already own the domain and we already have a site set up, there's no added cost for web hosting or for web design tools if we just restructure the existing site to include OMSC stuff. So the concept we're looking at here is one website, which we'll demo in just a second. The executive committee would approve anything that goes on the site. So they would approve the overall organization, the pages that are on it, and then the general content. The web hosting platform that we're already using has industry best practices for website security. So, and also the website will be an information only site. We won't have any interactive applications or anything on it. That we won't be collecting people's information or any type of user information. So from a security standpoint, I feel pretty good about the current process. If we did this, then the facilitator, whoever that is, right now it's me, but whoever it is in future would be responsible to keep the website updated. And for that reason, we've kind of set it up to be very simple, has limited bells and whistles, and the website system that we use, the design tools that we use are very easy to use. Anybody can do it. So if I can do it, anybody can do it. So it's right now set up so that if for some reason the OMSC was not able to afford to have contracted facilitation, anybody from one of the member agencies should be able to pretty easily just step in and take over the site if you decided to still keep it going. Let's see. So I'll just give you a quick demo and then we'll have a brief discussion here. So this is what it would look like, a very basic homepage, and with the new name on it, there would be tabs for an about, a little bit of information about the OMSC and how we're structured, a link to the org chart, and who's in the various leadership roles for the current biennium. And then an opportunity for somebody who is interested in following what the OMSC does to join a friends list. There's a page for subcommittees, and each subcommittee right now is set up to have its own page with a link to the charter and a little bit about the subcommittee and what it does and who's the chair. Oops, okay. And then the modeling users group, of course, still has a presence on the site. And so we have OMUG here with the presentation library of all the previous presentations and that they've been given, an upcoming events calendar and an opportunity to join the OMUG mailing list. And then the last, and then a page just kind of overviewing the collaborative topics and the main stuff that the OMSC is working on in the current biennium. So hopefully I won't make you dizzy here as I scroll down, but we have information here about the greenhouse gas topic, emerging technologies, activity-based modeling, some freight modeling and travel behavior data, kind of some of the main things that the OMSC is collaborating on. And then on the last page, just a contact page. So that's pretty much it. Any thoughts or discussion about those changes? I will say right now, OMSC information is housed on ODOT's website, which is fine, but it does set up a, it kind of may lead people to believe that the OMSC is an ODOT committee, is a creature of ODOT rather than an external group that that ODOT collaborates with and supports. So we just thought this might be a little bit of a cleaner way to present OMSC information. So I'll just open it up.
Any questions or thoughts for Carol?
Oh, I see a whole bunch of in the chat box here.
I think they're mainly me. I'm poking and just getting it. So it sounds like I was just curious what limits we have as far as if we wanted multiple people to be able to post with OMSC Executive Committee approval that we're making a change. It sounds like maybe there isn't a limit to how many people have access to post. It just is how we want to organize it. Is that what's
right? It would be up to us. There's different levels of access permission to the site, and so yeah, if there are other people that we want to be able to manage a certain page, like if a subcommittee chair wants to be able to manage his or her own subcommittee page, we could set it up to accommodate that. That would be something the executive committee should discuss. It does get, it's a little scary for me to think about having too many people, with access to different parts of the site. It gets out of control.
I wasn't necessarily advocating for one. I'm just trying to understand what options are if we went this path for down the road. So I like the idea that more than one person could have it, and it sounds like there's no limit. It's just what we want to administer. Right. So and then I was also poking with how much junk can we put up there, And Becky said it's a flat fee, but I got to imagine there's some kind of cap. Like we can't just put hundreds of terabytes up there, right? There's got to be something that limits it.
Yeah, there is a limit. I think we have 10 gig of data, but we can get around that by just linking. If, you know, we don't have to have everything posted or hosted by the website. We can provide links to other locations, Google
Sure.
Docs or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Just, yeah, I was curious what the limits, what options we are. So, and so if we did have multiple people with permission, like, so you have software on your machine or something where you created that plan
No.
engineering?
It's all online. It's all done online. So there's no software to be installed. It's all cloud-based tools.
Okay. Well, when you were showing the demo site, it had a, you know, it was on, as opposed to Oregon model, I forget what you said, Oregon. It was plan engineering. So what,
Oh, right. Yeah. It's right now it's just set up under my account.
okay. And then you
Online,
push
yeah.
or something like everyone has an account and then you push up like.
It's yes. So yes, to answer your question, it would be kind of like that. So I'm the account owner right now, and then there might be managers that also have access. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I'm probably getting too much in the weeds. I'll stop. Thank you.
No, that's good.
All right, thanks, Alex. Any other questions, thoughts, input, especially on the general function and look of the site that Carol showed today?
This is Chris. Kind of to Alex's point and to the point of not making this sort of a full-time job for Carol, which I could easily see happening, you know, because I'm tempted to to make all sorts of suggestions right now, and I am strongly resisting that temptation that I have. So would the role of the executive committee be to create rules around governing content or actually policing content itself? And so that's one area. And I think you touched on that, Carol, in a previous slide. I can't remember where, did we talk about this at the executive committee that I'm probably forgetting, or?
We talked about it, and I think I sent you guys some preliminary procedures for the website. To
Okay,
look
so it was
over,
more about rule setting rather than actual content sort of policing.
right.
Okay.
Right.
Well, I would say the executive committee probably can do both of those things, really, because they get to dictate what, you know, at the end of the day, they have to agree to what goes on it.
Right. Okay.
So therefore, that's kind of the, you know, yeah.
I would imagine that the subcommittee content should be led by the subcommittee chair. And then the entire thing is more of an executive committee review. We do not want to make changes very often, and we do not want to have an exhaustive list of information, but we do want to do a better job than we're doing on the ODOT webpage right now. And we do want to be very sensitive to topics that could create challenges for us, the way we share and communicate the information. So we want to kind of be sensitive to that angle. And I think the executive committee membership is more accustomed to working in that political environment. So we do want that approval step. And we'll start simple, and we can make it a little more detailed later. So nothing will be set in stone.
Yeah, and if any issues come up kind of with what you're thinking about, Chris, or not, then we should certainly address them. I'm sure there'll be kind of an ongoing maintenance and upkeep, and we'll refine it as we go a little bit.
Yeah, I love, obviously having Carol sort of be the person who's directing traffic, right? And because she can, clearly that was a well-developed site, and style wise it was perfect, I thought. And I'd rather have sort of someone like Carol sort of in charge of that, so we don't go all different directions in terms of style and conventions and sort of everything else. Right? And so
great. Yeah, good input, thank you.
Okay.
And then on the contract management side, essentially Carol would be given a budget. Like, here is the number of hours you get to spend on the website every year, and she'll manage the budget and us.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think since it's a little bit of a new function and a different way for us, sort of we'll get to some of those questions Alex was asking, I think, when we get to the nuts and bolts and think about, okay, who is going to be able to put information up there? And, you know, if Carol's gone on a 4-week cruise to somewhere and we want to put something up there, et cetera, right? And so
Yeah. That'd be
it
great.
won't be for a couple of years, but yeah, we'll have
Yeah.
to, I think at the exec committee, we can kind of lay out those details.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and honestly, you guys, I don't see it for, I mean, for my level of effort, it's really not going to be any more than what I'm already doing because, you know, every time I'm already managing the site for OMUG and I already have to work with Becky to get information to be posted to ODOT's site where the current stuff is. So I really don't see it being a big, any additional time on my part.
Great.
So
Yeah.
maybe as a voice for OMAG, I think I think it's a good move. The only concern I haven't discussed with the two other coordinator for OMAG yet. I think it's probably make the OMAG a little bit buried a little bit inside the tab, and then make it a bit harder to navigate than it's now. So I also don't know whether it will affect the Google search results and so on, because historically we do have some other folks even out of state, some other agencies that found our website and then contact us to get some information of how OMAG is setting up and then participate in some of our event remotely. So we certainly want to keep that part going.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, thank you.
I'm not sure whether there's ways to certainly not overcomplicate things, but make the navigation for the OMA content a bit easier, because supposedly that's a more public front for the generic or the general public.
Yeah. Okay.
The OMA site isn't changing at all. We're just adding a new one for OMSC.
No, we are we're combining.
We are combining them.
Yeah.
So maybe we have a better way to visually highlight the two distinct.
Yeah, let's think about that a little bit. And Li-Ming, I might circle back with you on some ideas for making that navigation better for OMUG stuff.
Sure.
Yeah, and I think to the other one, to give some thought to you know, the search aspect and how you get these things to show up in a search. It's good point too.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
So, Carol, and Becky, were you guys thinking of putting links from agency sites to this website, or would that be a place, or is that possible? I don't know what the you know, the state rules are about putting light links, but that's also a possibility.
Yeah, because that's what Carol mentioned when Alex was asking about storage space, especially if it's a large or big report, we can just put in links.
No, but I was thinking the other way around.
Other way around.
Yeah. Which, I mean, you know,
like on ODOT's site.
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, ODOT can. Yeah, I would think so. Yeah.
So that may actually address some of the access issues and search results. If it's already there, you say, okay, here, they can still find it there and they can link it back. So I don't know how the search functions work, but it's OMAG site is already a part of ODOT's big website anyway. It's already buried. So this may actually unbury it a little bit. So I don't know how it's gonna work, but yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Did you get everything you needed, Carol?
I think so. And folks can just email Becky and me if they have any further thoughts. And what we'll do is bring this back to the executive group before we make anything live publicly. So we'll get a full blessing from you guys.
Great. Thank you. All right. Thank you both. Appreciate it. All right. Now into our ongoing business with our subcommittee updates. And we're going to have Becky, stay online here and start off with the modeling program coordination.
All right, so we even met this morning and covered several things, but to give you a short intro, the Modeling Program Coordination Subcommittee, which has been very hard for me to remember the acronym, the MPC, is a standing committee, so it's always in session. It's always there. And it's basically a primary technical and interactive forum for the model development and application between the MPOs and ODOT. And we meet quarterly, typically, and it's agency staff that work with the MPOs and ODOT modeling in the Transportation Planning Analysis Unit. So that's who we are. We have been doing a lot of different work over the last half year. We did update our charter and everything is aligned with the new biennial work plan. We've been hearing regularly from Nick and Kelly about Urban Sim update. And also Kelly has talked about the LCOG experience with streetlight data purchase and how it was used and what they learned from it. So that was about February of this last year. And currently we are thinking ahead to ideas for research because that process, the ODOT research cycle, starts up in the fall. So we have to think ahead and come up with some ideas that are competitive in that process. We also heard from Alex about Activity Sim and a potential pooled fund project and what is being done now on Activity Sim. We also looked back at the 2019 Freight Subcommittee recommendations, and the idea was to evaluate it as to whether it's still relevant, the priorities are correctly identified, are there any gaps, or are there things that we should remove, knowing that we probably won't get to it. So we just touched on that earlier this morning, and we'll continue to make progress on that topic. But really interesting, what we had a presentation from the Portland Bureau of Transportation about the TNC data that they are collecting and how that process is working, a little bit about the agreement and the confidentiality requirements, and then a tiny bit of results, which are of course what we're all really interested in. But it looks really interesting, and we plan to hear more about that in the future. And finally, we just touched on, like 2 minutes, this idea of an OMSC communication plan, and it's really geared to external players so that we do a better job explaining who we are and what we do. So that will be coming soon in the future under the MPC. Every year we do update the modeling tools inventory that's done by Chris. And we'll also discuss and think about the future direction of our modeling. You know, if we go to ABMs across the state, what does that mean? How are we going to do it collaboratively? What would be the timing? How would this be, when would this model be expected to be used? And how does that align with the household travel survey? Because that data would feed into those models. And I already mentioned that we're getting ready to think about different research ideas for the ODOT research program. We're also closely linked to the technical tools subcommittee, and that's led by Alex. So you'll hear from Alex later. And the kind of one of the many common themes relates to the Activity Sim platform for the travel demand models. And not to forget that we need to continue to think about the connected and automated vehicles and how to represent them in models and test how they perform and figure out how to really represent that in our models. So plenty of work ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Becky.
Oh, sure, sorry.
Yep.
Any quick questions for Becky before we jump into Alex?
Yeah, this is Tara. So maybe Ali will, well, it's not Ali, it's Michael now leading the greenhouse gas. We may end up with some items that would be appropriate to be part of that looking ahead elements of your group as well as the technical tools subcommittee. And so just a little warning, I guess. Yep.
Some possible alignments cross-cutting
that
issues are
the next steps coming out of there might fall into those areas.
great. Yeah, and maybe we'll
Yeah.
hear about a few of those with the GHG subcommittee update
Right,
possibly.
Michael.
Great, great. Okay, thank you. Okay, Alex.
Sure. So technical tools subcommittee update. You know, I think it's a good partner to the MPC that Becky just walked us through. You know, I think there's some kind of overlap in its purpose, but the you know, this conversation is focused on developing tools, I believe, and also it has it's intended to be more of an ad hoc committee firing up conversations as needed and shutting them down. Although the overall place to hold the conversation is standing. And I think the conversation around activity sim and what Tara just brought up around GHG are great examples where if they were to kick to the MPC, it's on the kind of a quarterly cycle, and some conversations might require a little bit of a faster you know, coordination and a focus group. And so I think that's where the technical tools subcommittee helps fill that need. So next slide. Just an update. We haven't been doing much with the 2020 count program, but I did want to update the group because we've been updating for a series of these years, because we had intended to start the count program back in 2019, and that got delayed a little bit because of ODOT software switching and of you know, the OHAS delays, and then COVID hit, and so. But now officially ODOT is out, kind of counting on the road, and so the counts that we're hoping to supplement our survey activity are starting now, and that might be a little bit early, and we had envisioned, so ODOT has a 3-year counting cycle, so we had envisioned this running 3 years to cover the state, but we can always tack on a 4th or 5th year depending on what happens with the survey and COVID. So that's off and running. The other big piece that is happening under the technical tools subcommittee is the conversation around emerging tech. And there's a number of things kind of underneath that umbrella. Before this, there was a Zephyr a Zephyr webinar, although I like Zephyr. I might coin that, I think. There was a Zephyr webinar around system dynamics, and so that's happening underneath emerging tech, talking about how to better represent emerging emerging trends in RTPs, figuring out how we're going to get emerging tech into the Oregon Transportation Plan, getting our scenario reference assumptions in line for the OTP, testing around Team FEMAT, and additional you know, research on the topic and development around improving our tools are all occurring underneath emerging tech. So that conversation's occurring. Those are the current activities. Next slide. And then looking ahead, so the emerging tech group, work group, I see having probably a life for, it's, you know, we'll at least the next couple of years. A lot's going to be changing, and that group will probably continue to meet for another couple of years, if not many more. We're going to continue to look for towards Team of FEMAT testing, specifically around the Oregon Transportation Plan and other bill efforts that are coming up. As Becky mentioned, there's this discussion around how the OMSC might want to approach activity sim. And I think ultimately kind of decisions are likely to occur at the MPC. I think we still need to work that out a little bit. But I think it's right to identify in the MPCs, but the tech tools I think will kind of speed up conversations in between those quarterly meetings. And so that's what will be happening there. There's also a desire to get better measures out of our tools through deploying something like Metro's MCE tool. And so we want to have an OMSC kind of deployment of MCE and looking to have that conversation underneath tech tools. Continuing to have conversations around assumptions, modeling assumptions into the future, and to facilitate peer reviews as needed and requested.
Great, thank you, Alex. Any questions for Alex? Anything
Yeah,
related to
yeah,
tech
this
tools?
this is
Chris.
Chris. Alex, just for your information, Elliot Rose at Metro, who's in the planning group, is about to kick off what would be a consultant supported study around emerging trends and how those emerging trends are ultimately represented within the context of the RTP. And the idea, I just had a quick meeting with Elliot early this week, and the idea would be to have some experts come in and inform sort of the space around the uncertainty, if you will, and then applying sort of those recommendations in sort of a modeling context. So I think there's some potential overlap here. Do you want me to have Elliot reach out to you to see if there's some commonality that y'all could leverage from each other on sort of the emerging tech?
That'd be
stuff?
great if we could, a handful of us could at least be a fly on the wall if he was willing to do
It's
that.
a different, yeah, it's a slightly different angle, but they're clearly related. I think there's, both you would benefit from, from being in contact with each other. I will have Elliot reach out to you.
Yeah,
That'd be great. Thank you, Chris.
that'd be great.
Yeah, right.
And I see Adam is listening in, Argo too, and he's talking a little bit about the OTP OHP. It's a big part of that as it kicks off, so might be a good touch point there, especially if you're bringing people in. There might be some really good touch points there, so that's great.
Alex, do you have a timeline for the activity sim discussion or development? I'm asking because when the OMAG brainstorming the last time we met, activity sim is a potential topic we were considering for this year. So kind of think whether it will be a good time for, say, involve you and other people work in activity sim to at least offer a Oregon perspective on activity sim.
I think it's a really good idea. So we're having RSG facilitate some of the OMSC's discussions around how the partners might want to move forward with this. And that first meeting is in May. And Joel Friedman obviously will be a part of that. And I know he's helping with OMUG this go around. So he can probably weigh in. But I'm thinking maybe by the fall we'll probably have, if it could wait till then, we'll probably have a much better sense for how the different groups in Oregon are planning to move forward with activity sim.
Okay, great, thank you.
Great. Any other questions for Alex? Okay, let's move on to Chris with the travel surveys. And if people think about other questions, feel free to, put something in the chat as well. Chris.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Okay, the travel survey subcommittee, or TSS as we like to call it, it's really all about sort of planning for, managing, and delivering the next Oregon household travel survey. And so while the subcommittee itself has been on hiatus for some time now, there's been a lot of activity in the background and sort of a lot of exciting recent news to share. So for those of you that are on the subcommittee, make sure your instruments are tuned, because we're about to get the band back together here. And so with that, Carol, we'll go to the next slide. So in terms of recent developments, we've got funding in place for what we're calling the scoping and design phase. And so ODOT and OMPOC are funding that phase of the project entirely. And the third phase, the implementation phase, will be funded obviously through a combination of MPO contributions, as well as again ODOT supporting a big chunk of that work as well. The process itself, where we are right now, is we have closed the request for proposals window that closed on April 5th of this month. I'm happy to report that we have received multiple compelling proposals that we're sifting through right now. Let's see, we've got a team of 5 of us who are sifting through those proposals. It includes myself, Becky, Kelly Clark from Lane Council of Governments, Chimai from ODOT, Tyler Deakey from Bend, and Mark Harrington from RTC. And so I mentioned that the proposals were due on April 5th. We've been mulling and reviewing those proposals over the last couple of weeks. We will initially score those proposals as a group. Then we'll have the proposers, various proposers come in, and we'll conduct interviews and presentations with them. That will be next week. And then in early May, we expect to have a recommendation from the review team as to the consultant that we would like to move forward with. So then once we have that decision from the team, we'll obviously let the consultant know they've been successful, negotiate a contract, and we're thinking that we can get a notice to proceed in a sort of an executed contract sometime by mid-June. I should point out that the way that this project is structured, and this is probably redundant or old information for a lot of you, but Lane Council of Governments is the official procurer of these consultant services. And so they are, the contract between the consultant and for the project work will be between Lane Council of Governments and the consultant. Everybody else will be developing IGAs with Lane Council of Governments to cover their contribution to the project. So so by mid-June, we intend to kick off officially the scoping. Like I said, for those of you on the travel survey subcommittee, at that point in time, you'll be getting plenty of advance notice from me, but we will increase the tempo of our meetings quite substantially between starting in mid-June. We expect the scoping to extend for about a year or so. And then we don't anticipate being in the field in terms of collecting actual data and interviewing people and having people fill out trip diaries until the fall of 2022. And so we've got plenty of time to think through some of these emerging issues that are basically unfolding before our eyes these days, and come up with a pretty solid game plan in terms of collecting data that we're going to be comfortable with and happy with in terms of what our needs are going to be within model development or existing conditions for RTPs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just looking at some of the other bullet points. I think I've covered most of them. Yeah, so that's, I think, all I have right now. I'd be happy to take any questions that folks have right now.
Any questions for Chris? All right, great. Thank you, Chris. I know you guys are looking forward to getting that kicked off. It's been a long road.
Yeah, and apologies that I'm having to be a little cryptic. We're in this sort of procurement phase right now, and I don't want to say anything I shouldn't be saying.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah, thank you. We'll look forward to some updates on that in October for the group.
For sure. Thank
you. Okay, and now Michael with the GHG subcommittee.
Yeah, exciting that the band's getting back together. Our band continues just to make good music, so I'm here to update on that. Next slide. So this subcommittee, greenhouse gas subcommittee's real work product's been evaluating the analysis needs for greenhouse gas work in our models and identifying the gaps and then working on ways to fill some of those gaps. So the group had done some work on coordinating with OMUG and completed the second deliverable that we committed to, which was the greenhouse gas analysis needs white paper. And then I joined the group midstream here in the last 6 months to help steer the subcommittee work on it. Next slide. And so this graphic kind of represents the workflow for the subcommittee. We're in the process of evaluating recommendations to the subcommittee on work that we think that can be done and what in different priorities of the work to fill some of those gaps. And we're still on track to meet the final report in the fall of this year. And I think our next committee meeting is in May. So we're chugging along. Next slide. And that's all I have. Very short and sweet.
Great. Any questions or input for Michael on that? Okay, if not, like I mentioned, feel free to put some things in the chat if people think of questions later for any of the subcommittee or subcommittee chairs. Okay, the modeling user group, Liming, I see that you're here going to lead that conversation.
Yes. Well, I'm not sure, Carol, whether you have slides on that, but I will just talk. So since our last meeting in October last year, we have, I think, 2 events. The one that Michael referred to in his slides, we have a GHG panel that moderated by Tara, and we have 4 excellent presentations cover different aspects, different perspective of the GHG analysis and programming. As you see here, we have Peter Hurley from PBOT, Kim Ellis from Metro, and then Yeme O from CCOG, and also Chris from Fears and Peers. So that the slides of the event is on the OMAG website. And then in February, we have our first virtual post-TRB from back. And it's better, it was better attended than a physical event, a bit surprising. We have, I think, 20 plus people participating, and Joe lead that or moderate that event. I think we have a very productive discussion that essentially debrief and the TRB takeaways. Again, this year it's fully virtual, first such event ever. So it was a very, I think, productive and fun. We have a food competition, what's for lunch. So that was really fun. Kyle was our judge for that. And then for upcoming event on May 13th, from 10 a.m. to noon, we have the economic related modeling panel. Kyle will be moderating the event. We have 3 presentation lineup. First one on congestion pricing. Presented by Matt and Alex from Metro, and then a second topic on Metro's economic value analysis by Jeff Raker from Metro. We have a third presentation by Lisa Zorn from San Francisco, the Bay Area MTC. She will be talking about the cost-benefit analysis for their long-range transportation planning. And then there are 2 events that we are eyeing, but we haven't kind of been firm on a date yet. I mentioned that we are considering activity SIM update later in the year or early in 2022. We are considering a COVID-19 travel impact event sometime probably in the fall of this year. Joe will be the one that moderating the event. And I think that's all I have.
Great, thank you, Liming. Any questions for Liming about any of the work the organ modeling users group doing or has done? Yeah, thank you all for keeping that moving forward. I know that it can be hard to find topics and corral people in to present. So thank you guys all for your work on that.
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
Okay, next up, we have Adam Argo from Oregon DOT. I think, Adam, you're up first, talking about some of the potential scenarios and kind of where we're at with the OTP OHP efforts. Yeah, welcome, Adam. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Brian. And Carol, I figured to just go ahead and share screen to run through some slides. And I'll preface with a couple things while I'm teeing up this slide deck. One moment, please. Okay, first of all, thanks for having me. This is a bit of a coming back to you after giving you this group a here we go, giving this group a bit of a precursory of how we were trying to go in scoping a contract where we see consultant services to align with what we need to do for the update to the Oregon Transportation Plan and Oregon Highway Plan. So that was in October, and I did talk about how exploratory scenario planning is the kind of undergirding tool and process that we will utilize through the Oregon Transportation Plan update. And then in some context with the Oregon Highway Plan update, where we may get into more drill down normative type scenario work. So I want to give you an update on where we're at right now. And I'm also going to mention that once I'm getting through my slides, and if questions come at me about particular models and applications thereof, because I am so lucky to have a number of TPOW and Climate Office colleagues and others of you out there who probably could answer questions better than I can about particular dynamics within the models themselves, feel free, any of you colleagues, to step in on those questions. What I'm going to try to do is keep things to talking about how we're linking the technical analyses to process here. So first, you know, this is really a sequenced type effort where we're going to start with update to the Oregon Transportation Plan, the overarching policy element, to provide a long-range vision of the state transportation system. We, you know, conceive a horizon year of 2050 for purposes of, you know, how we think about our tools and asking what if questions, and also in the aspect of visioning that goes into this work. And yes, as a scenario planning type of approach, this is about assessing a range of trends or drivers of change. This is exploratory scenario planning, and it's the OTP level. It's certainly the complex system aspect. It's not just the infrastructure and the user's relationship there. It's also, you know, the aspect of government and institutional relationships too, behind management of the transportation system. And of course, informing a framework for prioritizing transportation investments and an implementation approach. If you've all heard from me before, and probably from many others and in your own work, understand there's this hierarchy of statewide plans where the OTP is somewhat situated at top as the visioning element within the modal topic plans underneath. But I do want to make the point, I don't think of the OTP as the end-all plan that sits on the shelf as some major tome that gives out, you know, biblical instruction. It's more of a living document, and it's about, you know, providing guidance and identifying goals and objectives. And it is also needing, what we need to do in our approach going forward is have a more iterative aspect of it and how it can be adaptive and resilient for the agency meeting its mission. So Tara Widener had lent me this graphic, and I think I'd shown it before to the group, the cat's cradle graphic. And this is to illustrate, you know, this is a exploratory scenario planning approach that asks what if questions to address an uncertain future. And this graphic is meant just to really depict that we're having technical analyses in step with the public engagement stakeholder advisory process going through. You've all probably worked through these channels in your own respective agencies. So this is about moving conversations forward where analysis doesn't produce detailed prescriptive list of steps. It doesn't develop projects, but it is very much a high level strategic plan kind of element. So where we're at, OTP is phase 1. It's 18 months duration. I am the project manager for the contract. I issued notice to proceed to our consultant, which is led by HDR Engineering, April 6th of this month. So we're going to think that this is an old slide, but if we are starting now at April, it's really more that phase 1 would be complete around late fall 2022. And then the highway plan is phase 2 that will follow. Though what we're going to do is start developing, scoping and developing the aspects of what we're going to do with the highway plan toward the latter part of getting through phase 1 of the OTP. And I'm really going to talk mostly about OTP in this time I have. In an overview of the next 6 months, and this one's actually more updated than the last info I gave you, you'll see here that what we have to do is a bit of prep work in April and May that primes the consultant team, and also that gets us in front of the Oregon Transportation Commission. It's going to describe what it is we're going to do. We have an ask of them to be involved in our decision-making structure, which I'm going to get into a little bit. And here you'll see work groups producing tech memorandums. And one of those key groups is the scenario working group. And there you'll see the scenario development process where we have it starting in July. It's going to be about a year once we start building the scenarios and doing the analysis work from July on. So our team has RSG, if he's here, Bruce, or Ben Stabler, sorry Ben. Ben Stabler is our scenarios lead, and he basically is going to work closely with my colleagues Becky Knudsen and Alex Bettinardi and myself to really just get into the weeds on how are we going to work plan this? How are we going to understand respective staff assignments, the iterations of, what follows from certain milestones and efforts, and which tools are we using? I mean, all of those kinds of questions. So we'll definitely be busy doing preparatory work towards that. I just noted here on this chart that our scenario analysis we can say starts midsummer and will continue. So this is the basic bones of the OTP update decision-making structure. Where you see work groups, they're basically thematically aligned on, what we consider are real key goal areas that are already in our statewide plans. It's already in the direction and priorities that ODOT goes on. And the scenarios modeling work group has not been formally stood up yet, where it's possible we could engage an OMSC member or two to be involved. I will just have to say, stay tuned, because we will be communicating out more once I have some preliminary huddling with the consultant team. But like I had said, Ben Stabler, Becky, Alex, and myself will certainly be thinking about how we're going to stand up and work that work group. And then at the higher level, you have these other work groups that include equity, safety, mobility, climate change, resiliency, economics, finance, and freight. And we are purposely scoping so that there are going to be opportunities of intersection between these groups. We do not want to silo them. We know that they're going to help formulate issues that they research, topics that come up, and then really that drives questions that may go towards what we want to explore in our scenarios. And they also are, feeding the information that our planning coordination team is that internal ODOT group that's really like a kind of a confirming and advising group about what's the information that comes out of the subject matter expert-led work groups, and where ODOT has to validate what we say behind our programmatic efforts, our policies, the things that we do. And then the policy coordination committee is the essential steering entity for this work. They are external in nature. We will have local, regional electeds and policymakers, high level management type presence. We'll have industry representation. We'll have likely some peer state agency presence of some sort. And we may well see that this committee is actually chaired by Oregon Transportation Committee Chair, Commission Chair Van Brocklin. That's got to be hammered out. But it's essentially about the PCC vetting key messages, agreeing upon key policy goal areas and strategies, and the recommendations that then has to have interplay with the Oregon Transportation Commission iteratively along the way. And then we hope to get to ultimate adoption, like I had said, in fall 2022. So, so preview the slide that's next, but we are not starting from zero exactly, right? We have an Oregon Transportation Plan in place. And when I came to the group in October, as a reminder that our last major update of the Oregon Transportation Plan was 2006. The last major update to the Oregon Highway Plan was 1999. There have been several amendments that have updated those plans since. And that means, of course, there's a lot of imperatives of why we're updating those plans, but there are also things in place that we need to connect our efforts to. So I wanted to just point out some of the things that give us a place to start as we're developing the scenarios that we're going to explore. One is, how we're connecting to the OTC's strategic action plan. If you all follow ODOT, last fall, I believe, the commission gave us this basically this kind of short-term action plan with 3 overarching goal priority areas of equity, of establishing, integrating a modern transportation system, I would say building upon, and then sufficient and reliable funding. And then what you see underneath there in this graphic are sub-goal areas, objectives, and then from there has been a lot of work on developing implementing actions to carry out this plan, which is about a 2-year plan. This is driven by the commission. They're directing ODOT on short-term priorities and implementing actions. So in a way, they're the island that we're building around in developing the scenarios. We also have to consider that we have connection to investment and funding decisions in a bit of a longer range. So this is a graphic that depicts where statewide planning policy would then get to how we get to our funding, our main funding outlays programs. That includes the STIP, and what the investment strategy you see there is named is really meant to be a kind of a 10-year phased approach to how it is we stand up those 3-year STIPs and what gets ahead of planning and programming for those cycles. And then I also wanted to note that we've done some work that is priming for the framing of an approach of exploratory scenario planning for the OTP update. And one I'll go back to is the Emerging Transportation Impact Assessment. I was the project manager for that one, and it went from about summer 2018 to spring 2020. And what we did there, was we needed a framework to understand policy implications around emerging transportation technologies. We did it by keying on 8 foundational goals. You find those goals in our Mosaic. If you all are familiar with the Mosaic least cost planning approach that ODOT adapted, that has had these focal areas, these categories that really align with our statewide planning goals. So these are ones that we chose. Really, they very likely are those kinds of elements that we key around in developing priority goal areas with the OTP update. And then what we did was we looked at policy implications and level influence across institutions, because it's not just about ODOT's level of influence that we consider here, where the OTP is, the visioning element and aspect of the statewide transportation system. That where's that level of federal government influence? Where is other state agency influence down to local, regional MPOs, counties type influence into private sector? Different goal areas had different levels of that kind of influence. I expect the same kind of aspect of what we explore, of what we frame and where we go forward with the work groups and with our policy areas, is understanding that. What I'm really hoping is that our scenarios really build understanding of trade-offs and implications, and it really informs how we understand those levels of influence. So really, the discussion with this group, I don't have set narratives behind scenarios yet for the work, because we're just kicking off, and really we have opportunities to build upon that. And one is to learn what are your topic areas for scenarios that maybe your respective agencies' jurisdictions have been exploring or are interested in seeing in the statewide context. And then what's our effective connection to the OTP throughout this work? And I had teased before, it could be involvement in our scenario work group. It could be also engagements we have with each other down the line, whether I'm briefing you or we're maybe getting more into weeds with the subcommittee's work. So with that, I'm going to stop there, but we'll also note I'm running the slides that my colleague Alex Bettinardi will be following with as he is discussing the build of the reference case scenario.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. So are you looking for a little bit of a discussion or on some of those questions now?
Yeah,
or
if we have time, which I think we do, I think it's one, any questions that can be fielded, we should take this opportunity. I want to make sure people understand or get clarification of anything they're wondering about. But yes, Brian, my thinking is if there's particular scenario themes and also any findings of current stuff that's in motion, I'd be interested to know. Like I said, I don't have any definitive answers yet of what our defined scenarios are.
right.
But wouldn't you say there's obviously going to be a strong connection to those things that I said that are in place for ODOT right now. That includes the strategic action plan,
right.
In those goal areas. That includes, to me, where we went with ATIA, the emerging tech project, on those foundational goals.
Okay, so yeah, maybe I'll ask, since I obviously have some ideas, but I've got a direct line to Adam through our agency with ideas. So, from what people are hearing, what you're seeing, that Adam's presented, and as he mentioned, we're just really getting this kicked up. So there's some advantages if you have ideas or thoughts now, to let Adam know, either if you have ideas about what those scenarios should include, what we should be looking at and considering there, that would be great. Any ideas there from anyone on the call here?
This is less a scenario idea than it is a question, Adam. This is Peter Hurley with PBOT. Question for you on what the relationship between OTP, OHP, and the state transportation strategy, the STS, that was developed, I guess, in probably eight years or so ago and updated in 2018. What's the, how do you plan on working with the STS?
Well, from a very formal sense, Peter, the STS is adopted by resolution into the OTP, which that decision came down, I think maybe it was in 2018. I'm not exactly sure, but the OTC made official action to approve that. It means that the periodic updates on the GHG report that comes out from that effort really, to me, are elements that go into our assumptions that we're going to be building into our scenarios and the modeling tools. I guess in this case, I'm probably speaking to Vision Eval, but others can weigh in since they know more than me about how we build the parameters of our models and where we go with that. I would also note, Peter, that the relationship with the highway plan. The highway plan really is an integrated system element for ODOT in managing the statewide highway system. So I say what that does is it puts it more at somewhat strategic, but at a tactical level of decisions we may make about the system that could include revisiting our facility designations, for instance, right? It would be looking at our mobility policy. A lot of you probably know what is it, 1F? It's OHP's policy about the fact that our primary design decisions are based upon working within the facility as is, that exists. It's sort of a preserve and maintain before modernization type policy. So in lead up to the OHP update itself, Peter, while we did sequence this on purpose because we knew we needed kind of the overarching exploratory scenario findings, outcomes that drive prime goal areas and strategies, we really also need to prime, right, our framing for the Oregon Highway Plan as a systems element. What kind of tools and what kind of questions would we explore that get at those more strategic and tactical levels? And I like to say that we may not even come out of this where it's called the Oregon Highway Plan anymore. I mean, I guess if I had my way, I'd call it the integrated system. But anyway, it is not up to me. But I hope that helps answer your question of where it fits. And also just know that Tara in the Climate Office and their work on reference case modeling is definitely informing where we're going to go on development of exploratory scenarios.
Great, thank you. Nick, did you have a question?
Yeah. So apologies, Adam, if you discussed this already, but I think in terms of the scenarios, we're talking about that for the Corvallis area MPO's RTP update right now. And I think there's a lot of discussion on what the future holds, but there's not a lot of information on how that connects to actual transportation demand. So for example, there's stuff on the percentage of workers who are going to remain remote indefinitely after COVID and the new hybrid scenarios, but there's not a lot on, how does that relate to our peak PM travel demand, which is often the controlling factor for intersections and, highway expansion and kind of the mobility strategy that you mentioned earlier. So, we're having some of those conversations now, and I'm happy to share what what we're thinking, but we're kind of operating at a much smaller scale. So I think that's really what I would be looking for from the OTP update.
Great, thank you. Nick. I want to make sure we get to all these questions. Jeff, I see you have your hand up.
Hey, Adam, thanks for the overview. I appreciate it. I missed the first part of it. Sorry, I got called out of the room for a moment, the virtual room. I guess in terms of your question about scenario design, I have some thoughts that could be made more specific, but I think that you are facing competing goals, frankly, in emissions versus freight throughput and things like that. And so based on our experience with the recent metro transportation measure, which went down after some significant pushback, you might want to design your scenarios to exercise very clearly the trade-offs that are inherent in some of your multiple goals. For example, really, it's my professional opinion that Metro did not really, Metro did probably the most amazing public engagement process I've ever seen in its recent exercise. So the community voices were clearly heard and responded to in the actual design. But then what didn't happen was that we didn't pursue a specific goal like emissions reduction and try to get there and see what would happen. And so I think that you might be well served to think about, okay, let's try to reduce emissions really hard in the context of what is still a capital plan largely. There's a lot of policies in it as well, but try really hard to get there and see what happens versus other goals, and that might be informative. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, Jeff. One aspect here is when we have to be very careful about how we're talking to non-technical folks who, the realm of scenario planning, they will understand it as well as we help them understand that exploratory scenario planning in our case will not mean that we aren't having to consider, for instance, constraints that are going to inform a trade-off conversation. For instance, a sense of regulatory fiduciary aspects tied to decision-making by the agency, right? The reference scenario, Alex will be talking about the building of the reference case, is going to have to incorporate some of those assumptions regarding costs and revenue, for instance, and project scheduling, resources. And then I'd carry that into the aspect of we know that there is a conflict that exists for people palpably on the ground in terms of, freight priority versus people priority, particularly at the high dense metro level, right? So we need our scenarios. We need people to understand that the scenarios, what we're seeking are findings that articulate trade-offs between the policy areas and goals, but that get down to those kind of real world aspects. That's why there has to be some talk of constraints. There has to be some talk of what, the laws of geometry tell us. So I really feel like we're not going to be successful if we're not imparting to folks that we're not developing vision based on something that would ignore or undercut that aspect of finding of where your decision making is going to be based on the fact that you're informed by scenario outcomes that show you trade-offs very clearly. And this is it gets very philosophical, but in a lot of real lessons and real examples that I've seen of MPOs and some state DOTs doing with the scenarios work, there's ways to engage the public that doesn't treat them like, naive about trade-offs. And the level we educate them and use our informing tools too, right? That shows you have an ability to inform our decisions because that's a function of how well we are teeing up your understanding of trade-offs, for instance. So what I like, Jeff, about your comment is it just amplifies the imperative that just as we are needing, you know, robust decision making and good methodology behind our scenarios, it's the bridge of the engagements that we're doing, like the online open house, for instance. I'm hopeful we're going to stand up that online open house with some of those kind of lever elements, sliders, if you will, so that people see here, if this is what you like, this is what it means for these other things that have to have a place in the goal making and strategies. So sorry if I went off too long about that, Jeff, but boy, I just think you're hitting to me on the one of the key ingredients to this recipe.
Thanks. Best wishes.
Huh. Right. Appreciate that.
This is Kelly, if I may. I agree with Jeff, what you said, and Nick, we're having similar conversations at our level regarding, we're in the middle of updating our RTP in Central Lane. And we've had a lot of conversations around greenhouse gas emissions. So they'll be really interested in how any scenario planning can help inform that. And then equity, safety, and health are also big topics in our region. And I think you had those in your list there, but just to reinforce that, I think those are really important topics moving forward.
Yes, Kelly, we have it as basically a formal imperative because it's one of the priority goals of the strategic action plan, but we had already identified it as one of those key work group topic areas. And one aspect of that is equity is going to thread throughout the other thematic work groups and topics. And in the scenarios, we have to relate equity aspects across those lines, as well as climate. To me, there's a bit of a aspect of threat multiplier, if you will, where you want to consider what your findings are, climate on one end, all the way down through to, you know, sufficient funding and through other aspects, because it's all about resiliency. If I feel like if I keep to a theme of resiliency, it's going to maybe make equity, for instance, more salient, even with folks where equity is not front of mind in their work, whether it's where they are located in Oregon or how they sit within an agency or an organization.
Okay. Ali, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Adam, just the one comment and one observation that we have commitments to a fleet mix, for instance. I assume they are incorporating that into your scenario planning. You know, we signed an MOU to, you know, make sure that there's a certain percentage of our heavy duty trucks are electrified in the future, a certain year, and mix of fleet are going to be changed. You know, so we have ambitions that I hope it gets reflected, and maybe if we achieve the ambition to do better, and how they would impact our transportation plan. Other thing is that, you know, I don't know how you are going to react to and incorporate the infrastructure, the huge investment that's going to happen in a near term, and that may change your, I guess, is that a change to a reference case, or is that going to change your scenario planning?
Yeah,
Well,
that one.
Go,
Good.
Brian.
That's a good. I think that's a good.
segue.
That may be a good linkage with what I think Alex will be talking about is on that infrastructure side, Ollie. So that's a good. Maybe a segue to Alex here, and then you know, if folks still have inputs or thoughts on Adam, I'll encourage you to make sure you put some of those in the chat so that Adam's thinking about those. Great. Yeah. Thank you.
I agree, Brian.
Alex.
And Ali, I think you did tee up Alex very well. So Alex, I'm going to move to your slides and let you start. And again, I thank the OMSC for the time and opportunity.
Sure, and there's a lot of overlap here. So yeah, you can go ahead to the next one, Adam. So if there's questions for Adam, I think it can still evolve here. And so I'm not sure if I'm going to fully answer your question, but I definitely think it's a good segue. I was trying to type the same thing to Brian, but he got it without me having to type it. So as we've been watching the OTP get queued up here for a little bit, we've been scrambling in the background to try and ensure that our models, so we feel our models have been ready to go, the software from a software perspective, but from a starting point reference scenario, I think we're in an interesting new space here that we weren't in for the first OTP and that a lot of our RTPs haven't fully grappled with. Maybe that's not fair to everyone, but from what I've seen, a lot of RTPs haven't fully grappled with, and that is, what does normal look like in 20 or 30 years from now? And I think that's, I mean, to me, that's what I heard in your questions, Ali. What, like around the fleet, like, do we assume for the existing, for our current reference, that, or for the business as usual, that the fleet looks just like it does today? Or do we assume that the business as usual incorporates everything that's on the books regarding where the fleet is headed? And our stance is that, it's a little fuzzy because, like, because there's, it's impossible to predict exactly how things will change, but what we're gearing towards is not what the fleet looks like today, but something along the lines of what we expect the fleet to look like in the horizon year. And so that changes what your reference case emissions looks like, that changes what the operating costs are, that changes a bunch of things as your starting point to pivot scenarios off of. So that's one of the fundamental, auto operating costs is one of the fundamental inputs here that we're considering, and representing that fleet correctly would then also be a fundamental output around emissions that we want the reference case to properly represent, and that we want as the starting point for the needle, and then to see which scenarios take that higher or lower. But I believe, and the team believes, it would be incorrect to just assume that our reference point scenario has the exact same fleet that it does today. And so that's one of the things we're working on. Equally as large and looming is the reality of disinvestment. I'm not quite sure if that's what you meant about the immediate funding coming online. Maybe you meant the federal work. I'm not, did you want to clarify that part of the question before I talk? Or
I can, thank you. I mean, there's a $2 trillion infrastructure bill looming, and a lot of that is directed to, the highways and the what we were talking about, and there's opportunity which where we direct that investment. I think it's sort of can change the future, and I think some of that investment is going to come quickly. I think it's not a 50-year investment; it's maybe a 10-year investment window. So and I don't know if it goes in the baseline or it goes into your 2050 long range future scenarios.
Yeah. So that's great. So there is a little bit like that funding package is still being worked out. So none of us know exactly what it's going to look like, but we do know it's a lot. There's a lot of money. We do know it covers a lot of aspects of transportation. And I don't know. I was about to say we do know it's likely to come true, but maybe not. Like, I don't know. Maybe we don't know that. I don't know. Maybe it's a coin toss. But where I was about to go, which is slightly different, is that. I don't know. I say things that maybe are not said the best way, but I'm going to try my best here. And that is that, my criticism is that ODOT has not done a really great job in my mind at messaging the backlog of work that exists in the transportation system, and the billions of dollars of needed repairs that are on the book, that's there. And so, yes, there's trillions of dollars being talked about at the federal level. That's still short, significantly short, because that's at a nationwide program and it's covering a whole bunch of modes, and it's, who knows what piece Oregon would get, and it still isn't going to cover the backlog. And so, so part of the funding, so in the past, our business as usual has always been able to say, well, the infrastructure will be there as you know it today, and maybe we'll add a couple other projects on. But to this point, we haven't really done a scenario where the business as usual is a deterioration of the system, from a quality of roadway to a who can use the roads from a bridge loading perspective. And so we've been really trying to figure out, what are we going to say? How are we going to message that? And I've been really happy that we've gotten past the will we. So from what I've heard at the different levels of management, it's kind of a given. It will be discussed. And where we are is the how will we be talking about that huge budget shortfall. And so this gets to the federal, the federal package is we likely won't say this is exactly the fund, how we expect the funding to play out over the next 20 to 30 years. We'll probably have some kind of, this is the amount of funding we would need to achieve this level of system. And we'll have a couple of variations of that is where I imagine that will land. But all of them, with the exception of the golden scenario, will likely be a deterioration. Even with the federal trillions of dollar infusion, is still a reduction in quality of the infrastructure. And so we still need to talk through about what is the actual reference point. Are we assuming that we take today's funding and deflate it through inflation, to direct it and then deflate it and assume that's it? Or do we assume there's some big federal infusion and that we shift funds around and that we ensure a certain level of service? So we still are talking through that, but basically our reference scenario will involve some level of representation of that gap. And then related to funding is what are we, is having a tighter integration with what do we assume is funding the road, and how much how is that going to get paid for? Like in the reference case, how are we paying for that level of funding? And that again impacts auto operating costs. If we just adjust the fleet up, auto operating costs go down because our electricity assumption, or the cost for electricity and the quality of electric vehicles overall reduces the cost to drive. There might be some rebound of that depending on what we're assuming around how people are being charged to use this system. And so that also that also is something that needs to be figured out here. The other two I didn't touch on are consumer price index. It's somewhat of a bookkeeping item, but it is a global thing that ties it's the umbrella that ties the funding and the auto operating costs and the value of time together. They all have to have a common assumption about how is the power of the dollar changing over time. And in the past, we've been maybe not quite as rigid with it. And now we're trying to really ensure that all of our processes are using the same assumption. And if they're not, we at least are aware of that and have documented a reason why they're not. And I guess I'm kind of jumping ahead to a future slide, but that relates to different assumptions across a wide range of tools. And so it's a little bit easy when you're in one tool to have a common assumption, but when you're talking about a wide set of tools that come in, that's where you have to do this bookkeeping to ensure that you're keeping all these things consistent. I see a hand up with Jeff. I was going to just rattle through with my head down, but maybe I should pause.
Jeff?
Just a quick observation that may help you and Adam and everyone. I think your point about the fleet mix assumption speaks directly to Adam's very appropriate focus on how to conduct the engagement. Because one of the things, again, learning a lesson from Metro's recent experience is that the things that the state transportation plan and the OHP actually touch are not the full spectrum of levers in the world of the policy objectives. And so articulating very clearly to the stakeholders, ODOT can control this, but we can't control that. And some of your biggest levers may be outside of ODOT's control, and just dealing with that up front rather than let it become, frankly, a millstone around your necks would be a suggestion I would make.
That makes a lot of sense, and I guess I'm probably speaking very definitively or very, very passionately, if nothing else, about these things. But all we're trying to do at this point is get a starting point. I don't think any of us knows exactly what the fleet will look like, and so I think these things will all be tested. We just want to make sure we know that we're starting at a reasonable, believable, defendable starting point for the reference, and so. I think you're right, Jeff, and I think that these will be things that get swung and tested in a range and talked through. and figuring out the impacts of things outside of our control. The last one on the slide is value of time. And again, that's somewhat like consumer price index, where it's just a bookkeeping exercise to ensure we know what assumption we're using and that it's consistent across, and that it's more challenging than maybe it sounds like as I say it. I only have a couple of slides. I talked for a bit, but let me, if I could just wrap up real quick and then shift to questions. So if you could move to the next one, Adam. So those are some of the big assumptions we're trying to deal with. There's a lot of other assumptions. We could make a really long list. And these are things I'd like to get to, but I'm skeptical that we will. But thinking through, wealth and income have a lot to do with how much you travel, and I would say we haven't been doing a great job thinking through what that future assumption should be, and I don't think we will this time. I mean, it'll be what it is. I mean, it'll be kind of pushing the same thing forward. I think there's a lot of work that could be done there. I just don't think we're going to get it this time around. So I think people will probably kind of have the same wealth distributed as they do today, will be the assumption. Household composition and land use development are similar. There's a lot of work there. Obviously, Oregon's just passed a lot of laws around those things. I'd love to explore them and really think through what the reference case should be on those things. It'll probably be what they are today, is my unfortunate shoulder shrug on those. And we could make a longer list of unfortunate things that probably won't be captured as best as they should be. So next slide after that. What we're kind of immediately working on right now, so we've been working a lot of those, and what we're working on right now is, and these columns and rows will get updated a little bit, but with a lot of the content that was just in Adam's slides, in addition to the conversations that were occur under the OTP. But basically, we want to kind of have, what are the levers people are, the OTP needs to exercise, and what are the outcomes they want to review. And on the modeling side, we're going to be going through an exercise of what tool and information do we think best completes all of these cells. And we think it's a suite. We don't think there's one tool that does all these things. And so that's where that, over the next couple of weeks, we'll be kind of fleshing this out a little bit. And that's where we need to ensure that the assumptions that we're building in they're not just for one tool, they're across the suite of tools, and that we kind of fully have a sense for what we're going to propose. None of this is in stone until the OTP is fully off and running and we get buy-in. But what are the tools we're proposing that process use as a starting point? And then obviously we'll have to adapt if things shift down the road from us. So I'll stop talking. That was what I wanted to say. And Adam or I can take any questions on this.
Yeah, any questions for Alex related to that? I guess I'll just step back a little bit on that. Alex had mentioned that, kind of the conversation around the disinvestment. I always look at, most of us have always, in our RTPs, anything we do, we ignore what we call the fix-it side. So we ignore the pavement, the bridge, etc. And we go with a Lake Wobegon day. So we got perfect weather, no crashes, everybody's happy and moving well. But in Oregon, the reality is we don't have enough money to fund even our bridges and keep them open to all loads. So that's something that we're facing. So we're going to have this conversation from a reference case, from the standpoint of either our reference case could be Lake Wobegon, and then we say, but reality is we're going to disinvest. And that means these routes are going to have these kinds of limitations and issues. And that could even be, if we have a wildfire there, boy, we can't get that heavy equipment there. That could be, so even beyond just those economic implications, we're going to have to wrestle with that. And this will be, I think, the first time that in a major policy plan like this, that we're really seriously looking at that fix-it side, because everybody wants to focus on the sexy enhance. Hey, we got money for this and that and the other things. We're seeing that pot go like this, that's why you hear us talking about tolling and all these things. And then on that $2 trillion infrastructure plan, who knows if it's going to go through? I think something just under 600 billion of that is for transportation. So it is truly an overall infrastructure plan, not just transportation, as people may know, but we see those come up every few years, and they have a tough road to hoe usually. So I'll, like you say, keep your fingers crossed, because that's pipelines and everything else too, infrastructure. So yeah, with that, any questions that people might have or thoughts on that reference case?
Yeah, Alex, do you have what's the future engagement on that? So as you're building it, I think Adam kind of walked through what the future scenarios, what they're gonna do. What about yours?
So from the reference side, under the tech tools conversation, we've been kind of sharing and vetting some of our, like we've been trying to document the reasoning for how we've gotten to certain assumptions. And when we want to do more than we haven't, it hasn't been as grand maybe as I would have liked it to be. But so I guess the short answer is we've been doing it through the tech tools conversation. We've only had a meeting or two related to that, and we probably should be doing more. I'm glad. It's exciting that there's a question and there's interest. So I would look for more opportunities to share those. So I guess if you or others on this call have interest in looking those things over, that just puts extra emphasis on completing it on ODOT side, and we've done the work, but just documenting it and sharing it. And so having interest is great. And so I'd love to have that conversation.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, maybe, I don't know if you have thoughts on that, Adam, with your committee structure in the OTP. I think part of those are going to be some sort of policy question and conversation on what are the assumptions, and then we're going to have to align the reference. So I think this is the tricky part where, from our tool standpoint, and this is what I keep telling our policy folks, we can start here, we can start there, et cetera. We have all this information, and I think getting help on what those reasonable assumption and ranges are is going to be really great. But at some point, I think it's going to be sort of this policy level conversation. Do we start with Lake Wobegon and talk with disinvestments? There's going to be this policy conversation about what is the baseline for these different levers. And that's where we're going to especially, I think, need help defining and getting our arms around some of those things with this group too, with some of it. Adam, I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, it's going to evolve a bit, Brian, in one, because, if Chair Van Brocklin's indeed chairing our policy coordinating committee, then he probably steers how the questions come out of them that go to us as staff for how to utilize tools or do other types of sidebar conversations or coordination work to get back to them on. That one reason I think back to that emerging tech issue is where, if we can frame understanding that governance level respective to scenarios, then and then the assumptions therein, that helps, because that might point their questions the right way. Because not only am I thinking of that the Jobs Act, the $2 trillion bill, what if the clean energy standard moves forward because certain legislation's passed, and then more executive orders? I want to know how we're going to undergird that in our models too, because that has massive implications for electrification needs, and how that might play into some of our scenario work on, say, where broadband is now threaded, and it matters to our goals around emerging technology like connected automated vehicles, electrification, So I wish I had an elegant answer. It feels like what has to happen is that policy coordinating committee, the better they are better that we prime them for understanding where they can ask, and we can find the levers to show them differentiation on outcomes from scenarios, the better. But I don't know clearly yet how they're going to take that aspect of how do you consider, for instance, things that would influence the state from the Fed side, or private industry side. But we're going to have to build some of that into our assumptions.
Hey, Alex, this is Peter Hurley at PBOT. One of the issues that we're dealing with, and I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on how you might deal with it, is projections on telecommute going forward, particularly in this post-COVID period, and what assumptions we should be making about level of commute trips, time of day for commute trips, particularly in urban areas. And just wondering what is your thinking on how you might approach that?
I'm not happy with the answer that's in my head, but I think that falls onto the my sad list of things that we'd love to think more about, but probably we'll go with what things look like today. That's a great point. So I don't know. I could continue to like express like how great of a point that is, but I think in short, we probably will not. I mean, I'm sure we'll test things through on a scenario side related to that, but from a reference standpoint, I don't know if we'll do like this is what we expect, how we expect people to be working, and traveling different, like as a starting point. I think we'll probably have to test kind of a range of things there.
Yeah, and Alex, I think that's where some of the distinction between what you're talking about and what Adam are talking about show up. You're talking about a reference case and something that this is the reference case and the assumptions we're going to make and then rotate off, which aren't the same as these are things we're going to test and how. So maybe to that question that Peter has, if you get him in, is there any thought to, are we going to be able to do some testing to say, hey, what if we get 20% of people, telecommuting? We know from an economic and demographic standpoint which jobs and who and all are more likely to telecommute, right, and stuff. But do you have any thoughts on how that would be tested?
Sorry, was that Adam or me?
Either one, I guess. I mean, I think from a technical standpoint is probably where Peter was asking.
Okay. Yeah, I
guessing,
mean, sorry, I was probably too kind of like down or pessimistic. I think the way you stated it was right, Brian, that we have the capability to test those, and we should probably do some bookend kind of tests. The reason I was kind of like pausing and waiting for Adam to fill in is because so I think we have the capabilities. I think we have levers and we have the ability to change those things, and it'll kind of be up to how we're going to set scenarios and how we're going to prioritize. There's lots of things to shift, and so if there's 100 things that we want to shift and we can only do 20, where does this fall on the list? And I think that'll be the discussion of which levers are we shifting and how far and how are we combining them to make a package you can message to the OTC and others.
Yeah. I think that's a really good distinction you're making there, Alex, that people might not have caught is, this is a statewide, and we're going to have from the time we start running stuff less than a year, where there's going to be a really limited number of scenarios. So we're hoping to use some of those exploratory tools, et cetera, to help inform us what those range of levers should be and which ones would impact the policy stuff that we're looking at in our planning efforts, which could vary from what, a smaller urban area might look at, right? Yeah.
For me, just a couple of quick things. I think it's important to get the reference case kind of accurate, because that's going to, in comparing the future case, that will skew it, the results. If we are making an assumption that we're already telecommuting and that's not the case, so in a future scenario that won't show any change if we because the reference case assumed that telecommuting is taking place. One of the things that we're doing here, we're actually embarking on rulemaking to expand our employee commute option requirements that is in the Portland metro area. We're going to take that statewide, and so just to take advantage of the experiment that we were sort of all a part of, and say, okay, you can do this. Okay, let's plan for continuing this. I think in terms of I think it's even our employee contract state level. I think it's the part of the bargaining and discussion is around the future telework and how that's going to get incorporated into the. So we need to see what that's going to turn out as for the state employees. But I think it's we can see that. I think we need to sort of include that as a really huge lever in the future scenario because it's. But how that impacts transportation. I mean, what we see people are not driving to work, but they're driving elsewhere.
Yeah, thank you, Ali. Good points. Any other questions that people have for Adam or Alex or thoughts? All right. Well, thank you guys both for sharing that. I know we're just getting underway with those efforts, so there'll be more involvement. And to Adam's point, there'll probably be more engagement, certainly with a lot of the agencies that are represented on the committee here. So I'm sure that stay tuned as we move forward. Adam, was there any closing things you wanted to mention?
Only that yes, we are actively thinking about how we may have some involvement of folks here in our working group, or at least an ask. But more than that, and Carol and Brian, is that there's still a continuum with how we'll come back to OMSC. So I just know I'm thinking about that, and and Ben might actually have to be involved in those future engagements this time, Ben. But I'm glad he's here because he's getting it going with us in earnest. But once we're in the weeds on some of the work, I think we might have things to come back to the group about.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And thanks again for your time, Adam. Appreciate it.
That's great.
Okay, on to some general business really around things that might be coming up and maybe changing venue or not, we'll see. But some of the conferences you can see listed here that are coming up, and Carol has those that are essentially in all blue with an asterisk by them are all going to be virtual this year. Pros and cons to that, as we all know from TRB, it's great to be there in person and you get different linkages and connections, but you get a lot more participation potential remote. So so be aware of those, that those are going on. I know the Planning Applications Conference, we have several of the folks from both Metro and ODOT participating in getting that conference together. So I think Peter Bosa and Becky Knutson are both involved in getting that organized. And is there anything anyone wants to highlight or anything that's not on this list that somebody might want to bring up?
Ray just sent me a note that the Conference on Sustainability and Emergent Transportation, it's been moved to March of 2022. So
March of 2022. Thank you, Ray.
Corrected.
Great. Okay, so and people, sometimes if you go to those and you get some good information, I would encourage you to share that with Carol so she can broadcast that out to everybody. And I think the last thing on the agenda here is go to the order. I'll mention something just really quickly so that people know. My division administrator, Jerry Bohard, I think everybody that may or may not know that Jerry retired. She's still around, but only for a little while and only part-time. And so Amanda Peets has been hired to be replacing Jerry Bohard as the Policy and Data Analysis Division Administrator. So she'll be starting officially on May 3rd. As you can imagine, if you know Amanda, she's the Climate Office lead currently. So it's going to be big shoes to fill in that office to fill Amanda. She's been serving in that role quite a while, but she'll continue in some and some version of that being the division administrator, the climate office is within her division. So she'll still have a strong role there. But she'll have a strong presence in the Oregon Transportation Plan and Oregon Highway Plan process moving forward, since our division's leading that. And a couple of changes just in my group. Some of you may know I have my modeling side, and then I have some analysis and some other sides, and some probe data reliability speed analysis stuff. So Chi Mai, who used to work in Region 1, now works for me in TPOW. She replaces basically the work that a lot of you know that Rich Arnold used to do. So many of you here are responsible for fast performance related reporting that you would have engaged Rich in, and more recently Ton, as he's filled in for Rich, but Chi Mai is taking that role. And then Peter Skydam has replaced Doug Norval. So those of you that work on any of the project stuff, NEPA stuff, anything like that, the analysis procedures for all the modes, bike, walk, level of stress, et cetera, for the agencies will now be Peter Skydam's responsibility. And he's been in a supporting role and is very knowledgeable in those areas for a while. So I just wanted to bring those up for TPOW and for some of the ODOT changes related to where I sit. Other changes, I don't know, Jeff, did you want to mention some changes at Metro? I know you.
Yes, thanks. Thanks, Brian and everyone. So I think most of you already know that Metro's revenue structures are pretty unique within the MPO peers in Oregon, and that Metro has its own council and has a lot of other things going on, including running the zoo, the convention center, the expo center, and some performing arts venues, and even some pioneer cemeteries too. So the pandemic impacts on Metro have been pretty unique amongst Oregon's public sector organizations. And you may recall that in past discussions, we've announced that we have laid off a couple of people out of the research center, which is the analytic department within Metro that I currently head, and realized other cost savings through the attrition of just vacant positions. So the Metro chief executive has decided to actually dissolve the research center as a department and to move its components into Metro's planning department. So the good news is that Chris Johnson, whom you all know well, will continue to lead the forecasting division with all its current staff. And Cindy Pedersen, whom I believe you all also know, is going to lead the combination of the data program, the software program, and the analytics program, with also under the planning department. This means that my job as the director will go away, so I'll be out of a job as of mid-May at Metro. The good news for me personally is that I will then be starting in mid-June, after some weeks of rest and relaxation and taking care of family business, with RSG. So I'll be going back to work with them. Some of you know, I think, that I worked with them before I joined Metro. And so Ben, hello again. And so you'll be able to have access to me through the consulting world. We're also realizing one other cost savings through a voluntary separation, as Metro likes to call it. I used to call it early retirement. Steve Erickson of our data program is going to be moving on to the next phase of his life. And so that will realize the cost savings. The intent is that this will preserve the bulk of the analytic capacity of the current research center. Obviously, there has been staff attrition, so our capabilities are generally the same, but our total capacity is lower. Chris Johnson will continue to be your primary liaison person to OMSC and Metro. Cindy may get involved. She will have a lot on her plate, as you might imagine. And as the transition plan matures and gets put into play, Chris and Cindy may, of course, be bringing other people into OMSC. I know a lot of our operational staff, like Kyle, are intimately involved, which is great. So that's the big news for Metro and for me personally, but I will still be dropping in an OMSC. I'll just have a different hat on in the future.
Yeah, thank you for that update, Jeff. It's sad to lose you, and I know that's a big loss for Metro as well. So, so to Chris, there's a way that ways that some of us in this group can help, feel free to reach out to us. On the other hand, I'm glad that you are transitioning well and still going to be involved in the work. So that's good to hear.
Yeah, thanks. Are there any questions I can answer just so folks know how to stay in touch with Metro? Again, you guys know Chris and Cindy well, so if there's anything I can do to help before I leave, let me know.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Any other member updates of anything going on that people might think this collaboration now, I believe we call it, would be interested in?
Brian, I don't know if what's of big interest or not, but we are pursuing the new California car standards. We're talking to them, so that means expansion of the zero emission vehicles, and we're also looking at the new medium and heavy duty trucks. So that's we continue to push the electrification of the transportation sector. So that's a part of our long-term strategy for dealing with the emissions from transportation section, both in terms of criteria pollutant and greenhouse gases. There was also the Clean Fuels program adopted the rule, expanding the program and the third-party verification aspect of it and an extension of it. So that took place too. So there's a bunch of rulemaking happening. None of it is earth-shattering, if you will, but it's all directionally correct. So I think, and I mentioned our effort around employee commute option. I think those are the things that will have overlap and it will impact us, the members here.
Great. Yeah. Thank you for that update, Ali.
Tara
Tara, I
has
see.
a question, Brian.
Yep. Tara.
Yeah, just general updates, I guess. The most exciting is that Vision of Al won a Zephyr Award, Exceptional Technical Achievement Award for 2021. So that was exciting.
Nice.
And so it's the tool itself and sort of its evolution and its open source is kind of the recognition, but you can see more on the Zephyr site. I'm hiring a technical person, so you might have seen that out on TMIP and so forth. So the small climate office group is expanding a little bit, even though it's shrinking with Amanda moving one level up. So a little bit of a disarray, and we're still, jumping higher and higher to sort of meet all the executive order work. So we're still working hard on getting GHG lens into the STIP process. We're doing a lot on charging and EV infrastructure and through the TINA effort. We're getting a roadmap on adaptation and a vulnerability map to talk about where those vulnerabilities are across the state and to start use that in addition to an equity map that's kind of moving forward. And then, of course, the other thing, well, not of course, but it's an interesting thing. We haven't done a lot with greenhouse gas on embedded emissions of construction and operations and maintenance. So hopefully to leverage off some of the DEQ work on the off-road vehicles and bringing in some of the materials that we use. So those are some of our newer topic areas.
Great.
And
yeah,
I guess Vision of Al is great. I don't know, Portland Metro is, just getting it running. I think I'm talking with Taya in between topics here to try to get it all running. So exciting to have that there in Metro, along with a couple of other MPOs and also at the state level. And to Ali, some of your comments with the Clean Fuels program might be a good place for us to sort of revisit some of the assumptions on vehicles and fuels, especially on those heavy duty side, and get sort of the scenarios we were talking about earlier through Alex and Adam on the Oregon Transportation Plan. So let's keep discussing options to get there.
Yeah. Thank
Can
you,
I ask
Tara.
a quick
Jeff?
question of Tara?
Go ahead.
Tara, is the equity map you just mentioned by any chance the same thing that we've heard DLCD might be working on, or is it something separate?
Yeah, is Cody here? I don't
It looks like he must have had to leave early, I was thinking.
Yeah, so we've been talking. The DLCD work is doing a rulemaking, so they have to know that something will be developed that has multi-agency approval. but that right now, just through the end of the year, it's just going to be sort of in concept, and then they're going to implement it. So we saw this window of a year or so, and so ODOT has jumped in with our equity lead, Nicatris Perkins, to come up with a map that we will be using internally in the interim. And so, you know, there's just discussions that maybe other people might be interested in using that with that, but we don't have a lot of capacity to do anything else. But the long-term vision, I think, is that we have this multi-agency agreement through that CFEC rulemaking that Cody is the contact for.
Well, would you like to be invited to a meeting that I'm convening between the State Chief Data Officer, OHCS, and DLCD on this topic? Because Metro is building something called the Social Vulnerability Tool for the Regional Disaster Preparedness Organization that might be a model or something that other people could tap into. And we're also curious, OHCS has some new responsibilities too. So anyone from ODOT want to join that meeting, like Tara and anyone else?
Yeah, I might send my person more on adaptation, but yeah, if you want to send it my way, I can certainly find the right person. And it seems like it's a little more on the sort of vulnerability resilience side, adaptation side, than it is on equity in the BIPOC community and that kind of thing. Is that correct?
Well, I should be more precise. The purpose of the tool is to identify where our vulnerable populations are so that disaster preparedness and mitigation can actually find them and respond to their individual needs. So the basic data is good for everything Metro does around equity. And so that's the win-win for us to be doing this for the RDPO. So it's not just, I mean, yes, the particular client is the EM community, but the basic tool, I think, is of general use. I mean, that's what I'm recommending that the staff who remain at Metro do with it. We'll see. It's still in motion.
Okay, great. Yeah, keep me connected.
Okay.
But,
Yeah.
Jeff, this is Ali. I think that would be of interest to us as well. We as an agency, we are developing maps for vulnerability, because we got to look at environmental justice issues, and so those communities, I think what I'm seeing is, a bunch of different. Hopefully, we're not coming up with different answers, but I think everybody's. I saw there's I think there's another equity matrix that PBOT developed for some of the freight tools, but some of the data. So that we're getting different maps, and I don't know, Brian, if this is, falls within our wheelhouse, or is it something we need to have some kind of a effort, have a certain set of maps, one set of maps that everybody is using, or if we're looking at, okay, what is what's the EJ community, or whatever, where's the equity matrix, whatever definition we come up with. We were talking with Odo, and actually they're looking at our tool around environmental justice issue. We have EJ Screen, EPA tool, trying to use that. So there's a bunch of stuff out there, I think, but
Right.
Everybody seems to be doing we're all going to try to address equity, and we're doing different things.
Right. Yeah. And Eric, I see your hand, and that's next up. But so I'll mention, to me, I think there's this linkage to the work. If you saw under Adam with the OTP, there's this equity column. So, I might make sure we let Adam know. I think Adam's still on, but make sure he might be a good one. Because sort of to your point, Ollie, I'm not sure what that definition of equity is and if it's consistent. And so, yeah, those we're never going to get the same answer, because everybody's going to have their definition. So it's going to be complicated, I have a feeling. But I agree, and I don't know who heads that up. Like I said, I don't know, Adam. Before, just Erica, I see your hand. Sorry, Adam, if there was anything you wanted to quickly mention on that.
Well, I also manage a project. It's a statewide equity white paper. It's really focusing on exploring best practices across the country of other agencies and how they are standing equity up particularly within transportation. It's very externally focused. It's an aspect of how are you getting equity into terms of prioritization of investments. So one part of that white paper is we have to establish working definition of equity. We've adopted the governor's office COVID response definition of equity that they issued about a year ago. So I'm glad to pass to the group what comes. We're not done with the final report yet, but I would be glad to pass that work along. And I just want to sidebar that the impetus for this is that this very equity themed work group and where it goes with the OTP update needed this kind of foundational research and knowledge for how we are thinking of equity in a statewide context.
Okay, yeah, that would be great to share that, Adam. So
And
I want
I'm
to make sure I
somewhat
get to.
familiar with Nicotris's effort too.
Okay.
And I would say that Cody would be a better one. He's got this multi-agency group and they're talking about moving towards the chief data officer to try to implement these things. So we had Michael Orman in a call with some of those folks, Ali, earlier. So I do agree it's kind of a Wild West right now, and it might be germane for OMSC. I don't know, but
yeah, I think we're more
here.
of the measure. I don't think, you know, so to answer Ali's question, I don't think OMSC is the group to be right to facilitate defining it, but we would be one that can help say, hey, here's information and things that can help you inform that, however you define it. Eric's been waiting patiently, so I want to give to Eric here.
Yeah, at the Public Health Division, you know, we've been considering this for a long time. We've had a lot of requests for a social vulnerability index, and we're looking really closely right now at the California Healthy Places Index and replicating the methods that they've used. At the core of their methodology is life expectancy, and so we're working with the Population Research Center at Portland State University to develop a track level data set for life expectancy that includes race and ethnicity. And so we're just getting those meetings started, but you know, traditionally a social vulnerability data index is, you know, developed within the state public health divisions. So you know, we're you know, trying to wrangle everybody in because you guys are right, it is the Wild West right now, and we've received quite a few requests.
Okay, yeah, thank you. You know, and I guess, Carol, maybe we put that on a tickler a little bit, because it does sound like people are getting to a point where they're starting to provide a lot of analytical kind of information, and maybe it's something we can discuss at the exec committee to say, do we play there or not, or what's that look like? Do we need to stand up a subcommittee? Is it a technical subcommittee, so that we can, if there's from the technical side some groups that would make sense for us to facilitate getting together versus Tara, like Tara, it sounds like you have some understanding of some of the things that are going on there, so with Cody and others, so somehow it might be good at least to know what that is and what the conversation might be. Okay, so
I would
any other
advocate for
quick
that.
member updates?
I think that's important at the very least for standard setting.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Jeff.
And it might just start with a quick meeting where we all share kind of what we're doing, so everybody knows what the other hand is doing, and we don't have to make any decisions at that point. We just aren't in the dark.
Right. Yeah, it could be, you know, it could be a forum for that sharing and that collaborative kind of thing, right? Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you, Tara. So any other member updates, things that are going on that you'd like to share? Okay, well, I think that wraps up our meeting for today. And just a reminder that our next meeting will be October 20th. Jeff, it's been great having you as one of the member agencies and one of the representatives. I know you've had a lot of things you've contributed, and a lot of thoughtful conversations over the years on making sure we get the business strategies and plans and sort of our business in order. I think your role in getting us to that point where we're a little more strategic in our thinking forward, I appreciate that. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. It's been great. And I'll still be around. So thanks.
Yeah. Yep. I look forward to working with you in your new job there. Yeah. Okay, well, I guess we will see everybody on the 20th. Thank you all.
Right. See y'all.
Bye, thanks.
Hi, everyone.